All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Johan, a member of the learning team here at the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and I'm glad that you all were able to take your lunch times to come and join us. Hopefully, we can give you some food for thought as we explore co-op governance today in this webinar. So a little bit about our hosts before we begin. We'll be exploring co-op governance today, thanks to our sponsor and our host, the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, a nonprofit community development financial institution for almost 50 years now, focusing on supporting cooperative enterprises. And we believe that economic justice for all can be achieved through thriving cooperative enterprises. And so we've been working for economic, social, and racial justice by advancing these community-driven solutions, these cooperatives. And so today, we're gonna record this session for those of you who have to tune in and out and who would like a follow-up, for anyone who's curious about that. Over the past 50 years, we've developed a reputation for providing co-op friendly financial products and services. And recently, we've been providing a lot more co-op business coaching, connections, and educational content like this webinar, or through our monthly newsletter, the Co-op Monthly. And ultimately, we serve as a community of socially conscious investors, recycling capital and getting it to places where it can be more equitable. So a little bit more about the learning team. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the learning team. We're also joined by Carolyn Itzavettel, a member of the learning team, and Maggie, Myrana, Ninja supporting the tech and the learning team, and maybe others. And so since 2019, the learning team has been in formulation, providing hundreds of hours to hundreds of co-ops and co-op curious entrepreneurs. So we're here for you guys. And no matter your stage of growth, our team of coaches can help you understand your goals and connect you to our ecosystem if there's a need for additional support. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can go to coopfund.coop/coaching, and you'll be able to book a session with us. So today, we're going to be exploring what is a co-op, why co-op governance. This term governance, sometimes I know it gives some of us, an itch we got to scratch or something, and how might we use this governance to empower our members. So as we've introduced ourselves, I want to invite you, if you haven't, to introduce yourself, drop your name, your co-op in the chat, something you're really hoping to walk away with today. But this is generally what we're hoping to cover. All right, so let's dive in. If there's no further questions, I want you to keep on dropping your names and information in the chat. Let folks know who's in the room. All right, so what is a co-op? If you've been tuning into this series, we've been doing co-op curious, co-op business models, and now co-op governance. You've heard a little bit of this before. And for those of you who are new, I'm going to dive in. I want to invite you to drop in the chat how you would describe what a co-op is to an 8th grader, right? A relatively clever 8th grader, maybe a 7th grader. What is a co-op? Feel free to drop it in the chat or anything like that. What is a co-op? A business that's run for the people, for the benefit of the people who use it and are working it. Love that. Anyone else? Give it a try. A business owned by the people who use it. Love it. Yeah, nice and simple. Keep those coming. A co-op is a democratically run business where members share in the decision-making and profits. So we're going to be exploring all of those, right? Business owned by the people who use it, democratically run, decision-making. Cooperative is a special kind of group where people work together and help each other. I like that special kind of group. Seems nice. I want to be a part of that group. And many more, right? We've got co-op is a business owned and managed by the workers and stakeholders who use it. Love that, right? So who are these stakeholders? Who are these owners? The way I like to describe a co-op simply is a co-op is a member-owned, operated, and benefiting business. the people who own it, the people who operate in, work in it, and the people who benefit from it, its customers, are connected, right? They don't always have to be the same, but that's what is unique about a co-op. In a typical mature business, the owner might be someone who provided the startup money, who hired an executive or a team of workers, the operators, to serve a separate group of customers, the beneficiaries. So you've got the owners, the operators, and the customers, three different sets of stakeholders. There's a lot of space as the business grows between those three key stakeholders. And the more space, the more disconnection, the less empathy, and decisions start to harm these core stakeholders somehow. In a nonprofit, that's possible too. You can have a core group of philanthropists who, support the organization, sit on its board of directors, make those decisions. Then you have your staff who might be further separated, executive or admin in field or whatever, and your customers. And so these folks who benefit from that nonprofit, they're disconnected from the operators and from the governors. And so in a co-op, it helps to bring all these stakeholders together and reconcile these varying interests and bring it in a space where we're not going to be making decisions that's going to harm a key stakeholder. So that's what I love about co-op, it being a member-owned operating business. And so whether that business takes the form of purchasing co-op, the members are purchasing together, right? We want a cow this Christmas, but I don't like hooves, I don't like horns. Maybe I can get some other folks who like those things or whatever it is, right? And maybe we do this so often, there's 1,000 of us owning our own grocery store, purchasing our food from a business we own. And now we're, purchasers in a consumer co-op or consumer members. Maybe we're residents living in a community where the rent is too high. Landlord keeps raising it, and now we're thinking, how do we control what is going on in our housing lives, right? Community control over housing. Maybe your workers sick of being exploited, sick of being underpaid or discriminated against. And so you create a worker-owned co-op. Maybe your members are children, sick of the system, ready to rise up and to take over their school and create a childcare co-op, or parents perhaps. Perhaps it's individuals or businesses who are sick of not having access to capital, so they create a credit union or financial co-op. Or maybe they're farmers producing food and realize we can't afford tractors and to compete, and so we create a producer co-op. So whatever form it takes, we have members operating, benefiting, owning a business together. And ultimately, I see it as a vehicle for community control. Community control, because no one's starting a co-op, thinking that things are fine as they are, right? Usually we feel excluded from control, we're angry about something, and we realize there's an alternative. So today's topic, why co-op governance? When you hear governance, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? I know it comes to mind for me. I want you guys to drop it in the chat. What's in your mind when you're hearing the word governance? What's associated with that word? Oversight, structure, control. Yeah, I agree. Definitely control. Founding, documents, structure. Yes. Lots of structure. Politics, bureaucracy, hierarchy. Excellent. Bureaucracy, responsibility. Someone put in a positive word. That's good. Good. Little positive points for governance. Yeah, all of these words come to mind. And so I'm actually going to explore a few of these right now. Big power, love that one. That is a major one. David Lids. So as I explore why co-op governance, I like to think about it in terms of things we have to unlearn because of these associations. Maybe we've experienced governance in a nonprofit organization or interacting with a local municipal government or the federal government. And so we got this idea for the first one I mentioned, hierarchy. Hierarchy is a big aspect in terms of what's associated for me when I hear governance, right? In the business world, it's money of the people. It might be some people over everyone else, right? There's this hierarchy. And I think, one story that I think really reflects the debilitating powers of hierarchy, whether you're used to it unconsciously and continue to perpetuate it, or you don't want it anymore because you see what it's done to society, you reject it. There's no hierarchy. I think we have complicated relationships with hierarchy that we need to unlearn to really bring governance into this world of the cooperative enterprise. And so the story, or rather a study that I heard recently, it was about these guys trying to understand limits. And they've done this experiment in lots of different ways, but this is an interesting one I hadn't heard before. So the researchers gathered a bunch of wild fleas and put them in a jar. And so these are wild fleas. As soon as they uncovered the jar, they leaped out. They got out of there. They had the wherewithal to know how high they could jump, and they got out of that jar. They gathered those fleas up in this controlled environment, covered the jar again, and now every time those fleas jump, they hit the head. So they learn to jump just beneath the lid, right? That's their level now, beneath the lid. So they're jumping beneath the lid, and that's a learned behavior. They said, wow, so limits can be learned. Then they uncovered the lid, and they still didn't jump out of the jar. They just kept jumping to beneath the lid. They kept jumping to beneath the lid, never jumping out. They said, wow, this is serious. Next, those fleas had babies, and those babies didn't jump above the lid, even though they had the natural capacity, right? So we know that limits are learned, and they perpetuate intergenerationally. So how do we deal with hierarchy knowing that, right? And when it comes to co-op governance, the truth is hierarchy still exists. It's just fluid. How do we direct the understanding that this person is really good at that thing, right? I'm really good at this thing. How do we allow folks to live up to their limits, not limit them because we don't want to see anyone above us anymore, because we're not interested in hierarchy as told to the world before? Or how do we unlearn ideas around who can do what, right? That people can't govern themselves from this community. Why not, right? How do we unlearn these aversions to limits, as well as some of our preoccupations with what we think are the existing limits based on hierarchy? So the power from hierarchy can flow if you remove those barriers. How do you allow that leadership to be situational? How do you remove the barriers? What are the barriers? So that's a big part. Next is this idea of structurelessness. Again, a lot of us are angry at the world and how things are structured. So we want to break those barriers down and create a little bit of structurelessness. And so we have difficulty moving from community to organization because of this structurelessness, right? Community, everyone's welcome, your role is necessary, we love you, you belong here. In organization, there's roles, rights, responsibilities, and we have to understand what those are if things are going to work, right? We're organizing for a particular task or a result. And so how do we deal with this inclination towards structurelessness, even though some of us are coming from a different perspective with that? So we have to deal with that, right? And the truth is, when you have a structureless or informal environment, power is going to be limited to those who know the rules. There's going to be a lot of implicit rules that you are not aware of unless you're an insider. And so unless you make those rules explicit, you're limiting your members' capabilities in terms of engaging in the governance practice, right? So how do we make some of these implicit rules explicit? Because that's the context in which everyone can actually participate. Otherwise, power is going to be limited to those who know, right? And I'm sure some of you have been in a room where there's, how do we know what we're going to do? And there's one person speaks, oh, I get it, right? So I'm sure you've been there. Another thing that is directly tied to that is this idea of concentrating power, right? A lot of us are coming out of workplaces and other environments where the default practice is to defer with someone with more power. It's very easy to do. And so how do we not do that, right? We want to recognize people's abilities, right? We don't want to limit them, create artificial limits, but how do we not lean into the fact that, John has the expertise in that, and Susie has the expertise now, just let them figure it out, right? So that's a balance that we need to ongoingly engage. And so we have to now think about collective power. How do we cultivate power? How do we recognize that there's more power among us than inside of one person, and move things forward with that awareness? So I think these are 3 areas we need to unlearn if we really want to dive into co-op governance, because we're creating this new world, but we don't want to bring the old practices with us, right? Because without awareness of hierarchy existing, but knowing we can direct it. Without awareness, that structure is going to be needed for different phases of our organizing, right? When we're a community, less so. When we're organized for a task, more so. And how do we not concentrate power despite it being easier? Without engaging these things, we run the risk of bringing old practices into the new world that won't serve it. So you have to think about that. And so the next is just this quote that was part of the line for this event, right? The true power of governance lies not in its ability to restrict, but in its capacity to empower, right? How do we lift that lid? How do we not restrict members of our co-ops intergenerationally even, right? Because people support what they help create. And if they are empowered to create more, we're gonna have more support and become more. So I would like to walk us through a tool called the Ownership Model Canvas, which is a precursor, I think, to governance, because you lay out all of those who are involved in this thing, the members of the co-op, the characters in the story, and understand what benefits, what responsibilities, what rights do they have? How do we bring this together? And once we understand who our owners are, stakeholders, and what rights, responsibilities, and benefits they have, we can now think about governance structure that is aligned with our goals, strategic, and is equitable. It removes barriers for people who've been limited from previous understandings and experiences, or from the lack of experience to really realize their potential. So in this document, this is on one page, you get to explore the purpose for the co-op, right? Why does it exist? What's going to be different in the world? Then you're looking at the stakeholders. That's the second box here. Who are your member owners? Who are your non-owners that are connected to this, that have a stake in this thing? What benefits do each of these get, right? If you have multiple types of members, you're going to have multiple of these forms, this ownership model canvas. You can create a different one for each membership class, and you can start putting them on one to see kind of where it is. So who are the stakeholders? Then you're looking at benefits and responsibilities. What benefits can I expect to get from being a part of this, right, as a member? And you might even consider those benefits for your non-member. But those benefits could be pragmatic, they could be social, they could be emotional, they can be multidimensional. And then you have the responsibilities. If I get this benefit, what do I have to give? What is expected of me, right? So what requirements are there for members? And you can think about benefits and responsibilities together. Do they balance out? If I can expect more money, what are my responsibilities, right? How do we balance that equation out, right? What makes membership worth it? Because responsibilities might include annual dues, membership fees, time in this board meeting. What are the benefits that make that worth it? Next, we have the furthest two on the right, governance rights and financial rights. Those are two big rights that any owner is expecting, right? Governance, making decisions, saying what happens, what doesn't happen, governing the co-op. And then financial rights, the rights to the financial rewards, right? If this thing makes money, am I being financially compensated? So those two things go hand in hand as well. And then at the bottom, we've got guidance. What guidance is needed? Do you have advisors? Do you create a board? Do you have other stakeholders informing you? What is our representation of those who guide us compared to those we serve? Is that connected? And then finally, investments. So how much money you need to get started with this thing. This is a useful tool at the beginning of your co-op journey, but it's also a good tool to bring everything back into visibility on one page and use it to play with how the governance structure needs to change based on these facts. So here's an example of one filled out very simply. This is a coffee roaster. Their co-op seeks to create the highest quality coffee and highest quality working conditions. Their stakeholders, their first members would be current employees, their non-owner stakeholders, customers, suppliers, farmers, local partners. Then they've got what benefits can these current employees expect? Higher salary if you're a member, health insurance, time off, profit sharing, voting rights, All right. They've got some of the financial and the governance rights in there. Expectations. What do I have to give to get that? Okay, you've got to have worked 300 hours and you got to be endorsed by 2 members. All right, that's what I have to give to get these. That seems fair, maybe. Governance rights. What decisions can be made so they have members can run for the board all the way down to strategic planning. And then they've got board can approve the budget and review the manager. You may have many more decisions to make than this, like changing this even, right? Changing the bylaws, changing these ideas and other strategic concerns, right? Who can be hired, who can be fired. You might be thinking of financial rights. The patronage dividend in this case is most relevant to co-ops. After you meet your obligations, the co-op's able to pay its bills and it's got surplus remaining. It can distribute those surpluses to its member owners. The members are purchasers or consumers in a co-op. How much did they consume? How much did they patronize that food co-op? If they're workers, how many hours did they work this year? How well did they patronize their worker ownership? And producers, right? How much did you produce, right? In pounds or whatever. So you're looking at these financial rights from a co-op perspective, typically through the patronage dividend. But there's others maybe. Guidance, again, we have initially a 3-person board. So that's what they're doing. And investment, how much is needed. So this is kind of the general spread of this tool. I'd now like to invite up someone who would be interested in exploring what this could mean for your co-op. So we get a live example. So who's gonna be the lucky guy or gal to test this live? If you're ready, you can drop it in the chat or put a thumbs up. Somebody will identify you. And we'll run through a few pieces. Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, just to throw it out. I mean, I know some people mentioned in the registration that you're actively working on what are possible structures for your co-op or your organization. And also, if you already are up and running and you're struggling with member engagement and things like that, we can do a look back also and understand how's this working right now. So get in there.
Yes. You ready?
Yeah, I can go for it. Unless there's anyone else chopping at the bit.
Let's do it. Varun, glad to have you here. Let's dive in. So,
Cool.
project name.
The People's Saturday School.
All right. So we've got the People's Saturday School. And you don't have to spend too long on this, but let's see if you can answer what you would say. What does your project hope to achieve? Why does it exist?
The short answer is to increase the practice of care, accountability, and cooperation within local movements.
Sure. Increasing accountability and care in these local co-op movements. So I think I have to insert a text box there, but we're going to hold that as a guiding light. Now, who are the stakeholders necessary to create this quality of care? Who are the first member owners to join looking at this thing? And you can
right now we have 4 member owners who are kind of committed to building the business. And then we have facilitators that are not member owners but do work within the cooperative.
Gotcha. And your members, are they individual facilitators who became members, consultants? Who are they? Workers?
Yeah, they're facilitators who are interested in participating in the governance and management of the business.
Gotcha. So I would say, committed or interested facilitators. Okay. Do you have other stakeholders that you consider? All the people who have a stake in this business?
I think our organizational partners
Okay.
who are also trying to develop the local movement ecosystem.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? What about your
We,
customers? Go ahead.
yeah, I think, and I think the organizational partners are both. I think they're both clients and they're um, yeah, and collaborators at the same time.
Gotcha.
Um,
Understood. All right. Any other groups you consider stakeholders? Sometimes we have a tendency to just list everyone, right? And we want them all to be members, but we do want to know who has a stake in the future of this thing, even if they're not members. So that's it. That's fine. But just want to put anyone you want here.
yeah, I mean, I think I could get into more detail with who those partners are, but I think one group that comes to mind is I mentioned in the chat that I organize a statewide through the fellowship with CFNE, organize a statewide network for co-ops, and I think I see our co-op as a stakeholder in the network, and being in yeah, our relationships with the other co-ops and the other solidarity economy initiatives in the state. That's important.
Excellent. All right. So I think that's good for now. Let's keep rocking. Next would be benefits. So these member owners, these committed facilitators or facilities, as this computer thinks, what are the benefits they can expect?
I think opportunities to generate income. We're still an early stage, so we haven't secured enough funding to provide salaries yet. But we're working towards creating dignified jobs for ourselves, and opportunity to hone our craft as facilitators and access kind of training and coaching opportunities.
Absolutely.
I think that a platform for folks who are teaching classes or offering consulting services, a platform in order to engage a wider kind of audience or market, in order to get clients or students to sign up for programs that a facilitator is offering.
Mm-hmm. And say platform to access broader markets for the teachers. All right.
And then
Mhm.
this is not a current benefit, but we are, long-term looking to have physical space. And so access to physical space in order to work and to hold programming and retreats and yeah.
Excellent. And so next we have responsibilities. What responsibilities are tied to membership? What is required for someone to become a member?
Right now, it's just a time commitment. It's currently, we haven't formally. We're in the process of trying to develop our bylaws, and partly why I'm here to understand different governance models. But we're, ask folks to commit in this current season. It's like at least 10 hours a month, which is not, and I think we're increasing that number in starting in August, we're asking folks to commit, I think at least that much a week, as we start to scale up our business. And it's hard with folks who are working full-time jobs. But yeah, because we don't have currently membership dues, or like buy-in, but that's something we're also looking to explore.
So let's explore it. What do you guys have in mind right now around a membership buy-in?
I think it's
No? Yes?
not the yeah, I mean I am open to it, and we haven't gone there as a team, in terms of getting to numbers and yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah, and it's a business that doesn't require like a ton of startup capital,
mhm,
because there's not assets necessarily, physical assets that are like kind of a brick and mortar location, or um, but um, but yeah, I think in the lieu of a membership buy-in, I think being able to bring in revenue through consulting clients or through grants or through fee, like ticket sales for classes and events that we offer is a part of what I think a way that people financially contribute to the business without having to pay dues at this current stage.
gotcha. So perhaps helping to generate income for the co-op?
Yeah.
All right. And maybe there's a number on that. Still figuring out. So,
I
so
think
this
that's
is
what we got to define.
gotcha. So that's good, right? At least right now, we're seeing a certain amount of time commitment ongoing. Maybe this is not a prerequisite. Maybe it is a prerequisite. That's a big distinction, right? Maybe you've had to have worked as a group for with us for 10 hours a month, or maybe going forward, you have to require that on a monthly basis, annual basis, weekly basis. And then we've got helping to generate income for the co-op, and maybe later on a member buying. Now, when we look at these benefits and we look at these responsibilities, do you think they're worth it? Are they balancing out?
That's a great question. Is it worth it for the member owners?
Yes.
Um, I mean, definitely. Short answer is yes. I think, honestly, I think that what's coming up for me right now is, I think it would require a lot more work, a lot more input. Like, like the more we put into it, the more we're able to get out of it. And so I think in some ways the benefits are more than what I'm asking people to contribute, because I'm holding a lot of work right now, and it's still trying to get the sort of collective buy-in. Yeah, from folks who believe in the vision, but I think we're still trying to, I think, grasp what it means to really be a worker owner, co-op.
So that's a good insight, right? We might have to make our responsibilities more robust, right? Or allow one person to take it on, which is not very sustainable and or cooperative. So I think that's a good insight, and that's the type of questions you want to generate, right? The member benefit, or sorry, the member buy-in, same question, right? This idea of what's worth it, what does it cost? That equation has to be balanced. And it's okay, I would say, for your benefits to outweigh your responsibilities. And maybe in the beginning, your responsibilities outweigh your benefits, but you have to be looking at that equation. These two things are connected. So maybe if there's someone who's been at this stage before, creating a co-op, trying to figure out, is the responsibilities we're ascribing to members matching up with the benefits? How would you deal with that? What would you say to Varun at this stage from your recollection of what you did or didn't do? Anybody? You can come off mute if you have some thoughts. Don't be shy. If you have that experience, it could be helpful. But
Well, I've had that experience, but it was a conversion, not a fresh co-op. So I don't, it's not, it doesn't align totally with the question, but I've been there.
okay, feel free to share a little bit, and we'll keep rocking.
Okay.
How did you guys deal with it? What do you wish you had done if you did the wrong thing, or how did you deal with it if it worked out?
Yeah, I think it's working out well, but to the question, are the costs to the members worth the benefits? We converted to a co-op. So we were a construction company in Baltimore, and we worked for banks and investors rebuilding and renovating their foreclosure stock or their vacant housing in really poor neighborhoods. And we just decided that they were shitty clients doing shitty things in these neighborhoods. So we'd be better off trying to raise money and, building a neighborhood portfolio of our own. So we had to raise CDFI funding to buy and renovate properties in these West Baltimore neighborhoods. So that's what the aim was. And then Seed Commons funded us, but as soon as they did, COVID came. So that's kind of a struggle we'll just leave aside. But to get to the point, even without COVID, it would have taken us a minute to get we're still climbing our way to profitability and to a positive balance sheet. We do by now have 20 properties that we own, and we've gone from 7 or 8 employees to 30 employees.
Wow.
So just the raw exercise of and our salaries have gone from $11 an hour, from a range of $11 an hour to $17 an hour to $17 to $48 an hour since the conversion. So just, that's a deeper dive there, but just from the perspective of proving out the concept is are cooperatives better for the workers? Yes. On the question of governance, it's still a struggle. Like, we're still very early in the stages to getting folks to understand that they own this business, and that there's a responsibility and a privilege to govern it. But it's happening. We've stood up bylaws, and now we're revising them. We do have I think 18 or 19 of our employees are members, and most of the ones who aren't just because they're new. They haven't qualified yet. And then the last piece would be dues. Like, when we started this, we just charged a $1 due because we were more interested in getting everybody involved. But now that we're, putting together a portfolio of assets that's worth, several millions of dollars, we're looking at maybe making that a 4-figure due, $2,000 or $5,000. At which point this discussion about the benefit to the employee to the member will get kind of real. Right now, they're not really compelled to pay that much money because we're just breaking to profitability and we don't have a positive balance sheet yet, but we should hit that next year. So I'll shut up with that.
No, that's good. You got there. Appreciate you, David. Yeah, I would say you started, and first, you've got the hourly wage. If you guys join us, we'll have higher wages. Now we see the proof of concept. Now we're thinking, okay, it's going to take more responsibilities because folks don't necessarily know their member owners. How do we make that responsibility a little higher, knowing that there'll be more benefits? So just playing that out there. That's what I got from that. TJ, you got your hands up. 1 more minute, then we can keep rocking.
Yeah, thank you. So, I should just mention that I'm also in the same co-op that David was talking about, and someone else on this call. And something I've been thinking about that's kind of tangential to this is the fact that co-ops are still a new method of doing business right now, and so one benefit and responsibility is I guess being the person or the company that others can go to. Like in Baltimore City, there's a co-op called Red Emma's. I'm sure you might have all heard of that. Like they have done a lot of unpaid labor, like I'm thinking of them as an example, to essentially evangelize co-ops. And like in a way, it makes me think of the people that I always see at the farmers markets and on the streets. I think it's maybe Seventh-day Adventists, just saying a name, but like other ways of thinking have people who are taking on unpaid labor to begin the evangelization process. I know this has been going on for decades, so it's much deeper than this, but I feel like that ends up being both a benefit and a responsibility to people who are at this point in this space. Like the benefit uh, can be that you're teaching other people how to think in this way, even if they say today no. Then maybe a year later they're like, actually, but then that responsibility comes with like training members to say, okay, we actually need to understand what we're talking about.
Appreciate that, TJ. Yeah, what comes to mind when you share that unpaid labor to evangelize, I would say, to get started, to see the opportunity and make it known. It's part of entrepreneurship, right? And typically the entrepreneur gets to recoup that value somehow. But when it comes to being a founder of a co-op or a movement, how do you recognize those benefits and those responsibilities as potentially distinct, right? How do you engage equity with that if you realize, oh, the founders had to do a lot of unpaid labor? So that's another opportunity to be strategic or equitable. So that's a great consideration. Thank you. Varun, let's keep rocking. We'll do this last two: governance rights and financial rights.
Sorry, I was off talking off
No
mute.
problem.
Key decisions. I mean, I think every decision feels key right now. And I think that's part of the I think we're trying to delegate, but I think because we're still trying, we're kind of still trying to figure out how to trust each other and how to trust the process. I think we kind of default to consensus in a lot of decisions, which slows us down. And I think we're the major decisions are approving, obviously, budget and our kind of a business model, our membership model, our our programming, our kind of meeting and our events calendar, our mission, our values.
Makes sense. And so you probably already noticed, some of these are going to be tactical program activities, actions. Some of these are strategy, administration, avoiding problems in the long-term formulation of business, right? So risk mitigation. And so do you guys intend to start separating bodies to look at some of these, like having a board or anything like that, committees or advisory?
Yeah, so this is, we currently have a committee structure. And I think not all of the committees feel empowered necessarily to make decisions. And so, and in part, some of us on committees meet weekly, and then some people meet, maybe once a month, and are just kind of communicating offline and trying to manage tasks and are kind of based on their capacity. So I think it's, I think we're in the process of actually consolidating. I think a few folks are stepping back from who were involved previously, are stepping back in order to not slow down the decision-making process, but we still are definitely going to need a lot of delegation. And especially the finance and development, kind of marketing and communications, admin and operations. A lot of the day-to-day tasks, I think, are, I think require delegation and I think and having people that feel empowered to make decisions and feel like they have the skills and the to manage those tasks. And I think yeah, so
Gotcha. No, that's good. I mean, in a small group, in this case, a service or worker owned co-op, we're now looking at the fact that our members are going to be board of directors, are going to be the committee guys, are going to be the actual implementers of the work. And so how do we honor that, as well as how do we make decisions together, because all of us want to be in on things, consensus versus delegate. And so do we have different hats, governor hat, operator hat, other types of hats? And how do we, the bigger question, lift the lid? How do we lift the lid off of these different committees and these different members? What is it going to take to empower them to make these decisions, right? Because they're not feeling empowered to make decisions. So now we're getting into the implications for a governance model. Not only what's needed in terms of how do you access this right, what's needed to exercise this right to make decisions, but the bigger question of what's stopping us, right? What is needed to be removed out of the way so that we can engage these decisions that we need to, right, honor and realize these rights. So lots of questions there. And that's the point. We're now seeing these gaps. We know them. We write it down. How do we lift the lid? So let's shift over to financial rights, and then we can continue on and take it offline. So what financial rights do members have access to?
say a little bit more about this,
Yeah.
Johan.
So the basics of the financial rights piece is basically what people usually expect from a business, right? They want to be paid, right? So if this business makes money, what do I get from it? So in this case, we're asking what members are entitled to financially, right? Can I get a patronage dividend? That's what most co-ops are thinking. If you guys are a worker-owned co-op or a service provider co-op, how many hours of service or work do we have to provide? And if we make a surplus with that, how much of it am I entitled to? Usually in a worker-owned co-op, the amount of hours you put in throughout the year, how well you've patronized it, entitle you to a proportion of that surplus. We made $100. There's two of us. Well, let's just say there's five of us. You put in 2 hours, I put in 5. We can now proportion out the dividends according to that. And we keep that internally tracked, right? And there's other benefits that a co-op might have access to. But that's kind of the top line, but it might have other financial rights, right? What other financial programs do we have? Do we do member loans, where members can finance the co-op, making the loan to the co-op, and then the co-op pays them back? Or maybe emergency funds. Does a co-op want to create that emergency fund to support members, right? So it could be more diverse than the basics, which would be dividends. It could include other important financial benefits to you guys, right? What financial rights do we need?
Yeah, and I think it's, where I think part of the challenge is where, some of us are generating the main revenue right now is through consulting services. And so we have a kind of percentage of our the overhead that we take out of our consulting fees that we charge organizations that we contract with. And we haven't decided we want to have a patronage dividend from that. But we haven't made a decision. And part of the problem is, I think, we had originally a group of 7 that started this past fall, and only 2 or 3 of us were working on consulting. So some of us were bringing in revenue and some of us were not. And I think that kind of, and because some of us were working a lot more hours than the others, and we kind of struggled to, we decided to just not, and we don't have a ton of revenue at this stage. We're sort of so we decided to defer launching a patronage dividend for this current fiscal year while we still build our business model and develop our bylaws and really actually get a sense of who's committed long term to being a worker owner, because we were just in the exploratory phase where some folks, I think, didn't really understand what that meant. And I think we're investing a lot of time and energy into the co-op, while others of us were kind of had a lot more at stake. We're kind of had left full-time work, and we're really trying to, actively pursuing clients or grants or teaching classes and bringing in more money to the co-op. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense for where you guys are right now as a startup. And so how do we access financial rights to this thing? Maybe the co-op gets a proportion of our sales if we're using it to market our services together, or maybe it gets the sale and we get a proportion, right? That's short term versus long term. At the end of the year, do we make a profit after we pay our bills? Do we get a portion of that, or do we want to save it in for this year 1, 2, 3? We just save. So these are the decisions that we can put here. What does this co-op need to lift its lid to become more? What do we need to become more, right? Some of us might need that emergency fund. Some of us might need to just get a proportion of the income right now. And so that's what we're doing. What do we need to put in place structurally to allow our members to leap beyond the lid? So we're going to stop here. We'd love to follow up with you with this, Varun. We know Varun, love Varun, so appreciate you coming online and sharing a bit about this. Yes, appreciate you. So we're going to keep rocking for time. But as I said, we can continue this. And anyone else, this is an example of how to use this tool. You look at these elements and you ask how they relate to each other, and then you ask what governance is necessary to empower the members who want to achieve this purpose. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and then I'll invite up Carolyn to talk a little bit about what rights and responsibilities of membership do not include.
Yeah, thanks. Before I get in there, I see Amia's comment in the chat, and I would love to answer this. So if I can scroll, they say this has been our challenge at Dorchester Art Project, classification being we're not a traditional co-op. As an arts organization, where do we fall? What makes sense? Producer versus worker? Any insight would be appreciated. So clarifying question, are you asking about specifically like how to calculate patronage or deal with surplus? Or are you talking about governance and like how to classify yourself? Say more, if you don't mind.
I think it was more so just because of where the conversation had been steering. It was more so in the sense of classification as far as like producer versus worker. That's kind of why I inputted that. But my colleague Amias is in the Zoom as well. So I think being more so on the governance side, he can speak to it as well a little bit more. Amias, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, but in a general sense, because of where the conversation was steering, that's kind of what I had asked to get some insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is kind of how do members relate to the co-op? So when we say a producer co-op, usually it means that people are working independently, making whatever they make. So, you know, for an arts co-op, that might be a variety of different media and stuff, and people have their own specialties. And then the co-op's really serving as the way to market, to publicize, maybe to have a storefront, maybe to have some administrative support that's shared, whatever. And so, you know, in that regard, that would be a producer model is where everybody's sort of buying into the co-op to get some additional business services for themselves as an entrepreneur, as a creator. And, you know, the structure might be that everybody pays for everything that's sold through the co-op. They pay a percentage toward overhead. And if there's a surplus at the end of the year, the surplus gets distributed based on how much value, dollar value of product was contributed. In a worker co-op, you're really selling, you're working and selling together. So it would be more that you have a store together, and the members are the workers who are working in the store, and everybody's making a wage based on, you know, you show up for that many hours of work and you're working in the store, and the store is contracting with artists and paying them market rate for their stuff and selling it, but maybe they're not stakeholders in the same way as the workers are. And they're getting, you know, they're getting patronage based on whatever the surplus is the store is generating after you've bought your stuff from the artists and paid them, and you know, operated the store, as proportional to the number of hours worked. So everybody's kind of contributing the same type of thing. You're contributing labor rather than a broad spectrum of products. How's that grab you?
Yeah,
I'm also
yeah.
on.
Oh, go ahead.
My fault. I'm also on that. This is Steph. We're from Boston. So I think the caveat is that like we're trying to acquire a building and rent out the building space to artists / the community. We're doing like art classes, but also people like do like rent out a studio to like paint, do music, so on and so forth. And so I feel like it's somewhere in between those two, where it's like a worker co-op, but also an artist co-op, because like we're not telling people to sell their products and then pay us a percentage. It's like, you know, take advantage of these resources, but there is like initial contribution. And I don't know if that like answers your question, what you were about to add, Hawes. I'm gonna pass it back.
That's where I was going to add. And then speaking to David's point, when we talk about on the governance level, and we talk about communicating the value to folks so they understand the responsibility, I think there's even a social responsibility tied into that makes it just even a tad bit more challenging when we're getting into the nitty and gritty of governance. So that's why I kind of was asking to get a general sense of, you know, what you kind of how you would have broken it down. And given how you broke it down, I kind of still reside where Steph is like we're kind of in the balance between both. So I guess that's what makes it so I guess a little bit more unique of a space to navigate. And so I guess we're just wondering if you guys have any thoughts. But yeah, that was great. Thank you.
There might be a third and a fourth possibility. Sorry, I'm the it depends lady. But you know, the third option may be that you're actually a consumer co-op. That if what you're doing is you're creating opportunities for people to access and rent space and use classes, you're actually providing a service and in a way a product in the form of real estate to consumer members in a way. So I mean, maybe that's the model, is that all the folks who are renting space, taking classes, etc., are your consumer members, the same way as if you were selling groceries and you had, you know, your shoppers were your members. And then the fourth and most complex is maybe you're multi-stakeholder. So maybe you have different stakeholders who have a different relationship with the co-op, and you feel like it's really important for the artist consumers to be stakeholders. And also you've got some employees, you've got some workers, and you feel like it's important for them to be stakeholders. And then it just gets exciting thinking about, okay, well, how much governance, right? How much decision making, what responsibilities and what benefits does everybody get with their different ways of relating to the co-op? And so that gets more exciting. But if you have everybody at the table, figure out what might work.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk offline about this. I know Johan probably is too. So all our contact information will be at the end. Yeah, and I'm in Medford, so we're neighbors-ish. Cool. So going back kind of to the ownership model canvas, we talked about members have certain rights and responsibilities. They get certain benefits that they're entitled to. What are a couple of things that are not guaranteed to you as a member of a co-op? And this is a little worker focused, but hopefully it'll scale. Who can think of things that membership does not guarantee you? feel free to drop it in the chat or shout it out. Okay, Varun pointed to this a little bit, that sometimes people think that if they're a member of a co-op, they get to be involved in every decision and they get to know all the information. Probably not. Ideally, it's a lot more efficient if certain, if the board makes certain decision and staff at different levels make different decisions. So doesn't necessarily guarantee you a right to be part of every decision. It's also not guaranteed employment. So, you have responsibilities in addition to rights. And this scales across any type of co-op. I mean, whatever your bylaws say, there is always a stipulation for how you can remove a member. So if you don't keep up with your responsibilities, if you do something that the co-op has said, we're not going to tolerate certain type of behavior, then you can be removed according to whatever the procedures are. Johan, you want to scroll through a couple of the things here? Yeah. So no, not free for consequences. Doesn't mean you get to take part in every decision. Anything else people can think of? Yeah, and this last one is you don't have to be an expert. So ideally, membership is open and accessible, and co-ops are creating on-ramps. We're trying to be inclusive. We want people to join. And so there should be an on-ramp for people with different skills, with different levels of capability, to become members. You don't have to be, an astrophysicist to join the physics co-op. That was a silly example. Okay. Next slide. So Johan also pointed to this, that governance is a way to create enough structure that people can exercise their rights, that rather than defaulting to some sort of implicit systems of power where people have power because of social hierarchy or because they spend more time and have more knowledge of how we do things, governance instead distributes power to members. Just curious if anybody wants to share an experience they've had with governance, whether in a co-op or nonprofit board or religious context, or what's a way that you've participated in exercising governance?
I can jump in. Handling terminations.
Ooh.
Yeah, could be tough, challenging. So understanding conflict in those situations, having a lot of diligence, making sure there's a lot of communication going on throughout that entire process. Understanding the transition process could look different for each and every employee.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking more to a direct experience, I had a time where I was working with DoorDash at the time, and there was a staff that we had to let go in kind of the time frame in which it was done. We would definitely, for it to be a real due process, we should have had more time. And it was a challenging situation at that, just because of the crunch that we had to, it was the notice of which it was given. So it was kind of an unfortunate situation, and understanding how to handle that conflict at the time, I hadn't necessarily been skilled enough to do, I would say, but still handling the situation very well. I think the biggest thing is too, when you talk about efficiency and what folks are able to exercise, I think another challenge that's often brought up when we're talking about DAP is how involved folks are in every process, and working with some of our council, understanding how that could affect the time and efficiency of things, how things are getting done and things are getting executed. But it's been a challenge because you want to have that participation at every level. So it's how do you do so in a way that works and we can still get things done in a timely manner. And so when I think back to the DoorDash situation, it's just like, you know, being a very corporate space, it's kind of like, this is how it's going to go, even though we have a traditional process. This is just how we're going to handle it. And there's kind of no responsibility on the company towards the employee about, you know, that with the, I just treat it with a situation like see it as a respecting. And I think there's a different culture within co-ops and there's different values. So I think about how that looks in this space and what some examples are of those type of situations and how those things are handled, being that the relationship to the organization or company is completely different too, opposed to like just being employee. It looks a little different as well, being a co-op.
Yeah, the DoorDash example is actually kind of great because it's like firing somebody is really kind of a management function in a standard non-cooperative business. And in a co-op, there is a layer where governance comes into play there because, you know, if the responsibility of governance is to make sure that member needs are protected, then there are some values that are articulated and you're testing, okay, well, what are our personnel policies tested against our values? How does that align? How are we going to help somebody do better rather than just kicking them out the door based on what we value? And also the flip side, how are we going to hold people accountable to participating in the ways that they've agreed to as members, as worker owners? So that's, you know, that's sort of where the governance comes in, is being the link between, as you said, how do we kind of do things efficiently and effectively from a management perspective, and how do we make sure that our members' needs are being met and their goals and values are being upheld? That middle piece of governance is about sort of developing the strategy and the goal setting and regular checking of management to make sure that that's happening. And again, like this diagram is a little, it's worker owner focused, but the same thing is true if you have, you know, a producer co-op and you've got a bunch of farmers who are the members, and, you know, their goal is to get their stuff to market at the best price and with the least waste. They hire, you know, a manager to make sure that that process happens, but they form a governance board out of a group of farmers to make sure they're setting, here are the benchmarks we want, and managing their manager and making sure that they're, you know, any additional values that they bring to the table around environmental impact or labor rights or whatever are still being taken into account, rather than just like move our stuff as fast as possible and sell it for the highest price. Can I keep rocking? Okay. Okay, so just a few more things in terms of how members participate in governance. I was so glad Varun shared their situation, because it's a great example of like when you've got a small co-op where everybody does everything and it's a little unclear, are we doing governance or management right now? But in a larger co-op, you know, usually governance is enacted by a board. So, you know, you're kind of, sorry, your main avenue into governance is being able to vote for the board. I'm sorry, you guys. Members being able to vote for the board and serve on the board. And the inverse of that is that the co-op has a responsibility to make it transparent how you get on the board, how you vote, and make sure members are educated so that they have the skills to serve that function. And like we just talked about, board sets long-term mission, vision, and policies, and provides oversight to make sure, you know, we're following the law, we've got an annual budget, we're measuring how are we actually doing against that budget and making corrections, and making sure that the co-op's around for its stakeholders both today but also for future members. So y'all had a lot of wonderful questions when you registered, and we're not going to get to all of them. We're going to send out a deck that's got a bunch of sort of supplemental material that you can dig into, and definitely, feel free to follow up with Johan or myself after if you want to like tease out a specific scenario. But I'd love to just open it up and hear people's questions around accessibility and engagement on the one hand. So like, how do we get members more involved? How do we help them understand? How do we make sure they're really getting a voice? And also decision-making structures, the questions about bylaws and who decides what, and how do we actually set up our governance? So I'm going to open it up if people have questions or, scenarios from your own co-op that you're dealing with. I appreciate Amias and David and Varun and anybody else I'm forgetting for sharing your experiences so we can all learn.
Hi, how y'all doing? This is Amias from Dorchester Art Project. Some of my colleagues have been in the room asking some pretty rad questions. My question for your group is, how do you all provide TA for co-ops, or how do us co-op operators start like working with CFNE on some of the nitty-gritties of governance, for example?
Yeah, Johan, do you want to take that one?
I would say yes. So in the beginning, I shared a link, coopfund.coop/coaching. There's a Calendly link attached to that button, connect with the coach, schedule a session, and that'll actually get you on the calendar of our co-op coach, who can then connect you to a deeper exploration of your issue. And then if you go to our website or you email me directly, we'll have my email, Carolyn's email, our co-op coach's email. You can reach out directly with a specific question as well. So that's the two ways. Get right on the Calendly via the website, coopfund.coop/coaching, and or reach out to myself, Carolyn, directly. So those are good ways. Know you guys, love you guys, happy to support you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sending those links and providing those emails. So then once we start so the relationship that we would, of support that we would have with CFNE is like a coach, more than a consultant. Like,
wow.
So y'all would like point us in the right directions or connect us with particular resources and folks like that, not necessarily with the daily operations of things.
We, because we're a community development fund, we're pretty low touch because most of our resources are, most of the resources that come in and that go back out are for lending. But we do want to make sure that folks have the capacity to access capital and then to be able to, use it well. So a lot of our work does focus on kind of getting ready to access capital, understanding your business, doing projections, that kind of stuff. But, we can certainly coach in a way of let's meet, provide some resources. Y'all go do some homework, come back, check in, a little bit of an accountability buddy, and work like that. And again, because we're a CDFI, it's free. It's not consulting. We're not going to advise you. In fact, for folks who are our borrowers, we really should not be advising you. We want you to be your own boss. But yeah, so that's more the relationship as one of a coach.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, and Maggie rightly points out, anything you see referred to on our website or materials as learning team or learning, that's us. That's technical assistance is what that's the jargony term, which we kind of hate. Other questions about governance structures or challenges you're having with member engagement or anything like that? Okay, I'm just going to start choosing things from the registration. So, Johan, if you're going to go to the next slide. One of the things that came up from a number of folks was, how do we get members more engaged? And that was a question both from what I would call mature co-ops who've been up and running for 5 or 10 years, and also from groups starting out who are like, we're trying to build our base of support. And, you know, in particular, when we're talking about co-ops that have members who are marginalized, and that's part of the reason why we're coming together as a co-op, is because we've been excluded or not able to access certain things. It's particularly important to know, like, okay, that's who we are, that's who we want at the table, and think about, well, what gets in the way? What gets in the way of participating? What gets in the way of doing stuff? One of the huge things, and it seems obvious, but is just, can people come to meetings? Is there food? Is there childcare? Is it at a time they can get there from work? Are they able to join virtually if they can't? You know, we have one co-op that we meet with where like half of the folks are on the cell phone. Some of them are at work with the phone in their ear during meetings because that's what makes it possible for them, but also they get to do the learning and providing input in that context. Education also is, you know, if people have to like know special ways of doing things, it's not very accessible. So making sure people know, when are meetings held? How does this stuff work? How do I find the information I'm looking for? Getting out information in alternate formats, like instead of, you know, just written meeting minutes via email, maybe do a little TikTok hitting the highlights of here's what we discussed, here's what you need to know for next time. Incentives and making the meeting more attractive. So, I mean, again, food is awesome. Stipends might also be appropriate. Anything that you can do to acknowledge that people's time is valuable and that they have a lot to do to arrange to be at meetings. I'll also say a thing about co-ops so for 20 years, I was part of a landscaping company, and we bought out our boss and became a worker co-op about 10 years ago. And we had a big divide initially because folks who were out in the field were like out somewhere getting dirty for 10 hours a day. And the idea of coming in after a 10-hour day and trying to think and make good decisions together was a really heavy ask. And so like we ended up either saying, okay, certain days of the month, we're going to cut work early and spend the time, clean up, get some pizza, and spend the time focused on meetings, or we're just going to do it real early in the morning. Come in with your coffee, get a box of donuts while everybody was fresh. So it's really about knowing who your members are and what they need, rather than being like, well, the way it's done is that we have a boardroom and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I'd love to, you know, invite anybody who's got interesting ways that they've overcome a challenge around getting people to participate. Y'all are the experts.
Hi, this is CJ from Word Lumber. I just perked up hearing you give that example. I was like, oh, what did they do? Because we've been struggling with the same thing, and we just came up with almost the same solution. We're a lumber yard, so similarly, a lot of our members have limitations of access just because they're out in the yard. And then yeah, it seems like or at least we're trying it out right now. I don't know how successful it is yet. We're still piloting it, but that's the solution we came to as well.
I don't know if this was said, but we pay now. We pivoted from, making governance voluntary to making governance paid work. And the rationale behind that is it not only incentivizes people to come, but also respects them, respects time, and compensates for those who might, or evens it out for, some of us might have the privilege to volunteer and others just don't have that. And then I think it also just honors the work, says, it's really important work and you should be paid for it. At the same time, you need to be held accountable for that work. So we're building accountability tools for governance. And then the last thing we did is we made that pay rate kind of like a median pay. So it's even for everybody. So the higher wage workers, get paid less, but the lower paid wage workers get paid more. But also an articulation that, in this spot, we are all equal.
Yeah, and that's super powerful. And I think it's something when you've got a business where people occupy like different roles in terms of like the external social hierarchy, is that, yeah, when we're exercising governance, it's one member, one vote, we're all equal. But also, this is where that implicit power thing comes in, that unless you have a training program for new board members where you're going and you're encouraging folks who may not have management roles, may not look at budgets every day, and making sure that they feel comfortable, they're not going to necessarily step up and feel like, oh, I belong on the board. They're going to think, oh, the managers are the ones who know how to do this work. And that's false. As a member, you know what the goals of the co-op are, what the needs are, and you've got a lot of experience to contribute. But it's, again, it's how do you set up structures that empower rather than exclude? Looks like we've got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to pass it back to Johan to take us out.
Excellent. So I think, it was great. I probably could have asked questions around competence. I could have asked questions around procedures, bylaws, information sharing, ongoing education. Could have asked questions about who decides, but you guys are going to have all of this in your slide deck. So if you wanted to ask that, then we're going to have some information here for you, and you can always follow up with us, right? Who decides? When do we decide? How do we decide? All of these things, we've got some information for you, right? These different tests of when should the board decide versus management. We've got all of these in here for you. So you can check this out and follow up with any questions. You said, how do we make it crystal clear who decides? Got decision-making matrix examples of here, different management constructs. So these are all great examples of how to do this for yourself. And so in conclusion, we want to ask you to consider what is empowering. How do you, again, allow folks to step into their potential? What is empowering for your members? If we have our ultimate purpose of creating a high quality of care in our ecosystem, what do our members need to be able to create change in that situation, right? And ultimately, if we do a good job of that, our customers might want to become members and create the next generation. And so what do they need to become the new members? And ultimately, what are the community needs to come into the business and ultimately become owners themselves, right? How do we enable them to lead beyond the lid? Because limits are learned and they're passed on into generationally, and we can remove them intentionally as well to create a more empowered future. So I want to thank you. If you showed up for us and you have questions, where do I start? Go to our website, coopfund.coop. We also have a YouTube playlist with lots of webinars on there. You can revisit any one of those. And we have a monthly newsletter, the Co-op Monthly. Check that out. We've got some tools hyperlinked in there, the business model canvas from last month's workshop, and the value proposition canvas, as well as the ownership model canvas that we reviewed today. And if you are thinking of connecting with us as a next step, schedule an intro call. You can go to our website, click on this link when you have this deck, and or just email us. So we appreciate you guys. We're here for you. and I hope you guys continue the good work of empowering people, create a shared future. Thank you.